Look at her dress. She looks poor. The bride scoffed, her voice dripping with contempt. The guests laughed, their pearls shimmering under the golden lights. Zola felt every stare, every whisper, but she stood tall beside billionaire Kaelen Sterling. To them, she was just another nobody lucky enough to catch his attention. But when the groom suddenly stopped the ceremony, turned away from his bride, and walked toward Zola, the room fell silent. He bowed his head and said, "Yes, boss." Two words that shattered every arrogant smile. The woman they mocked for her simplicity was the billionaire behind their fortunes. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, because dignity always wins. The coffee shop was a sanctuary built of worn wood and the rich, dark scent of roasted beans. For Zola Vance, it was the only place in the city where she felt completely invisible and entirely seen at the same time. Here, nestled in a faded burgundy armchair with a book open on her lap, she wasn't a name or a number, just a woman in a simple gray sweater lost in another world. Across the small table, Kaelen Sterling watched her, the sharp lines of his expensive suit softened by the warm, dim lighting. He was an anomaly in this haven of quiet simplicity, a man whose attire spoke of boardrooms and stock tickers, yet his posture was one of complete repose. He had shed the armor of his world the moment he walked through the door, content to simply exist in hers. Their love was forged in these silences, in the deep, meandering conversations about art, philosophy, and the quiet values that truly anchored a life. Conversations that had nothing to do with the material world that clung to Kaelen like a second skin. Zola looked up from her page, a faint smile touching her lips. "He writes that architecture is music frozen in time," she murmured, her voice just above a whisper. "What do you think that makes a life? A song played out?" Kaelen leaned forward, his gaze never leaving her face. "I think some lives are symphonies, loud and demanding everyone's attention. Others," he said, his voice dropping, "are like a single, perfect note held in a quiet room, the kind you can't forget." The peace of the moment was shattered by the sharp vibration of his phone against the wooden table. Kaelen's expression tightened almost imperceptibly as he glanced at the caller ID. "Eleonora," he answered, his voice immediately dropping to a low, placating tone. "Mother, yes, everything is fine." Zola tried to return to her book, to grant him the privacy of the conversation, but the space was too small, the tension too palpable. She couldn't hear the words from the other end, but she could piece them together from the careful, guarded cadence of Kaelen's replies. "No, she's not in finance. Her family? They're good people, Mother. That's what matters." He turned slightly away, his shoulders hunching as if to shield Zola from the invisible volley of questions. The easy comfort had evaporated, replaced by the suffocating pressure of a world she had deliberately left behind. When he finally ended the call, the silence he left behind was heavy and fractured. He let out a slow breath and looked at her, his eyes clouded with an apology she hadn't asked for. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was embossed with a silver crest that seemed to glitter menacingly even in the soft light. He placed it on the table between them as if it were a confession. "My sister, Clarissa, is getting married," he said, his voice strained. He didn't need to say more. Zola saw the conflict warring in his expression. He watched her as she picked it up, her fingers tracing the sharp edges of the cardstock. "Zola," he began, struggling to find the right words. "My family, they're very traditional. They have these standards. It's not about you. It's not that I'm ashamed, God. Never that." He leaned closer, his voice urgent, desperate for her to understand. "I'm afraid. For you. They have a way of saying things, these casual, cutting remarks that they think are harmless observations. They don't know how sharp their words can be, and I couldn't bear it if they aimed them at you, if they made you feel anything less than what you are." He was afraid of what their careless cruelty would do to her, and the raw vulnerability in his fear was more profound than any declaration of love. Zola listened, her expression calm and unreadable. She had faced worlds far more brutal than a family dinner party. She understood the intricate dance of class and prejudice, the subtle ways people build walls to protect their own fragile sense of superiority. When he finished, she placed her hand over his, her touch steady and warm. His anxiety was a tangible thing, a current running through him, and her simple gesture seemed to ground him. "Kaelen," she said softly, her voice a quiet anchor in the storm of his worry. "I'm not made of glass." She looked from his worried eyes to the opulent invitation. She wasn't a naive girl stepping into a fairy tale. She was a woman who knew precisely how the world worked. She would go, not to challenge his family or to prove a point, but to stand beside the man she loved, firm in the knowledge that her own value was not up for their judgment or approval. "I'll go with you." Her acceptance didn't bring the relief he might have expected. Instead, a new, shared quiet settled over them. Their love was a real and solid thing, a fortress they had built together in the sanctuary of this little coffee shop. But the world had just knocked on the door, and now a shadow of the coming event stretched across the table, touching them both. The tension was no longer just an unwelcome voice on the phone. It was here, in the space between them, a silent test waiting in the wings. The assault, when it came, wasn't a frontal attack, but a subtle, creeping infiltration into the sanctuary of her phone. A few days before the wedding, a notification bloomed on Zola's screen. "Kaelen Sterling has sent you a friend request." Zola stared at it for a long moment, a sense of weary inevitability washing over her. She accepted, knowing that to decline would be its own declaration of war. Almost immediately a message followed, a string of words wrapped in a cloying digital sweetness. "Hi Zola, Clarissa here. Kaelen's told me so much about you. I'm so excited to finally meet you at the wedding. I know our family events can be a little intense, so I just wanted to send over a few ideas for dresses. Just some things my friends and I love, so you don't feel out of place or anything. Hope this helps." Below the message was a cascade of links, a digital breadcrumb trail leading to the e-boutiques of Chanel, Valentino, and Oscar de la Renta. Each link was a carefully aimed dart. Zola read the message twice, dissecting the subtext with the precision of a surgeon. The words were a masterclass in passive aggression, a perfect microaggression veiled as a helping hand. "So you don't feel out of place." The implication was clear. You are out of place. You do not belong. Here is the uniform you must wear to be granted temporary admission. A bitter taste filled her mouth, but the emotion that followed wasn't anger. It was a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She had built this quiet life precisely to escape these games, these shallow, cruel methods of establishing hierarchy. With steady fingers, she typed her reply, choosing her words as deliberately as a chess player. "Thank you for your thoughtfulness, Clarissa. I have my own style, but I will certainly keep your suggestions in mind. Looking forward to celebrating with you." It was polite, it was dismissive, and it drew a line in the sand without handing Clarissa the satisfaction of a fight. When she showed Kaelen the message later that evening, his face darkened instantly. The easy smile he reserved only for her vanished, replaced by a thunderous scowl. "She did what?" he seethed, snatching the phone from her hand as if the screen itself had insulted him. He read the words, and a muscle in his jaw began to twitch. "I can't believe her." Before Zola could say a word, he was on his feet, pacing the length of her small living room and dialing his sister's number. He turned away, but his voice, sharp with fury, filled the quiet apartment. "Clarissa, what the hell was that message you sent Zola?" Zola closed her eyes, listening to the muffled, indignant squawk from the other end of the line. Kaelen's voice rose to cut it off. "Don't you dare tell me you were just trying to help. What were you trying to help with? Did you think she doesn't know how to dress herself?" It was condescending, and it was insulting. There was another pause, and this time Zola could almost hear the venom in his sister's reply as Kaelen's face grew even tighter. "Embarrass the family," he exploded, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Are you listening to yourself? Zola could never embarrass me, but you, Clarissa, right now you are embarrassing me profoundly." The call ended abruptly, Kaelen hanging up with a final, furious jab of his thumb. He turned back to Zola, his anger immediately dissolving into a look of deep regret. "I am so sorry, Z," he said, running a hand through his hair. He sank onto the sofa beside her, his shoulders slumped. "My sister." She's just shallow. That's all it is. There's no depth to her, so she judges everything by its surface. Please don't let it get to you. He meant it to be comforting, a dismissal of his sister's power. But the words landed like small, sharp stones. Shallow. He saw it as a simple character flaw, a personal failing. He didn't see it for what it was, a calculated act of exclusion, a tool of a class system designed to keep people like her out. He loved her. She knew that without a doubt. But in that moment, she felt an immense gulf between them, the chasm of his privilege. He could see the injury, but he couldn't possibly understand the nature of the weapon that had inflicted it. Later that night, Zola stood before her closet. The doors were open, revealing rows of simple, elegant pieces in muted colors. But at the very back, shrouded in garment bags, were the ghosts of a different life. She unzipped one, revealing the shimmering silk of a couture gown, a relic from a time when her name was a headline, not a secret. She could wear it. She could walk into that wedding clad in the very armor Clarissa worshipped, beat her at her own game. The thought was tempting, a brief flash of vengeful satisfaction, but she pushed it away. To do so would be to accept the terms of their battle, to admit their rules had power over her. She zipped the bag closed, pushing the ghost back into the darkness. Instead, her fingers settled on a simple, ink-black dress. It had no famous label, no extravagant design. It was just a sheath of perfect fabric, cut with an understated elegance that relied on nothing but the form of the woman wearing it. It was a quiet choice, a silent declaration. She would not change herself to please them. She would not hide, but she would not perform either. She would simply be herself, and let that be enough. The Grand Sterling Hotel was less a building and more a declaration of wealth. From the moment they stepped out of the car and into the gilded lobby, Zola felt the air shift, growing thinner and colder, charged with a specific kind of pressure she knew all too well. It was the atmosphere of a place where everyone was watching, weighing, and valuing everyone else. The soft strains of a string quartet were drowned out by a low, persistent hum of whispers that seemed to follow them as they walked across the marble floor. Dozens of pairs of eyes, peeking over the rims of champagne flutes, slid towards them, and Zola felt the familiar sensation of being catalogued. It wasn't friendly curiosity, it was appraisal, a silent audit of her dress, her posture, her very presence beside Kaelen Sterling. She felt Kaelen's hand tighten around hers, a protective gesture that was also a confession of his own anxiety. He was back in his native habitat, and it was a jungle. They hadn't taken 10 steps before two figures detached from a cluster of guests and glided towards them. Eleonora Sterling was immaculate, a sculpture of ice and diamonds, her smile a perfect, frozen curve. Beside her, Clarissa was a vision in white, though her own smile was brittle, stretched thin across her face. Eleonora's gaze swept over Zola in a fraction of a second, a dismissal so swift and complete it was more insulting than a glare. Her eyes landed on her son, and her smile thawed by a single proprietary degree. "Kaelen, darling, you're late." "Mother," he said, his tone carefully neutral, "you remember Zola." Eleonora's eyes flickered back to Zola, a flicker of polite acknowledgement that held no warmth. "Of course." The words were clipped, final. Clarissa stepped forward, her laughter as artificial as the hothouse flowers spilling from giant urns. "Oh, Kaelen, you finally brought your friend." Her eyes performed a slow, deliberate crawl down Zola's simple black dress, a look of theatrical pity dawning on her face. "Zola, that dress is so minimalist, very brave." The insult was perfectly delivered, a poisoned dart disguised as a fashion compliment. Before Zola could even register the sting, an older woman with a face like a powdered hawk joined them, her eyes fixed on Zola with an unnerving intensity. She leaned towards Clarissa, her voice a stage whisper designed to carry. "My, her skin is quite dark, isn't it? Very different." Clarissa's smile widened, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She patted the woman's arm conspiratorially. "Oh, you know, Aunt Beatrice. It's all about those exotic looks these days. So uniquely beautiful." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Different. Exotic. They were the polite society synonyms for other. Zola felt a surge of heat rise in her chest, the familiar burn of fury. Beside her, Kaelen went rigid, his knuckles white as he clenched his fist. A low growl rumbled in his throat. "That's enough," he started, his voice shaking with a rage he was seconds away from unleashing. But then, he felt a gentle pressure on his arm. Zola's hand was there, her touch light but firm, a silent command. He looked down at her, confused, but she wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed, calm and direct, on Clarissa and the aunt. When she spoke, her voice was perfectly level, carrying a quiet authority that cut through the tension like a blade. She offered them a small, serene smile. "Thank you for the compliment," she said, her eyes meeting Clarissa's without a hint of fear. She then turned the same placid gaze to the older woman. "I've always taken great pride in my heritage." Acronym, the effect was instantaneous. Their smirks faltered, their attack neutralized by an opponent who refused to play the victim. They had thrown their sharpest stones, and she had simply caught them, refusing to show even a scratch. They were left speechless, their venom rendered impotent by her unassailable dignity. The aunt coughed and mumbled something about needing a drink, quickly melting back into the crowd. Clarissa's face was a mask of stunned disbelief, her planned victory having dissolved into an awkward silence. Though she had won the exchange, a profound sense of isolation washed over Zola. She could feel the stares of the surrounding guests, their whispers now laced with a new kind of intrigue. She was an exhibit, a spectacle. Kaelen squeezed her hand, his helplessness a palpable current between them. He had brought her here, into this gilded cage, promising to protect her. But now they were both trapped, caught in the cold, glittering web of his world, and she was utterly, completely alone. The ceremony began, and with it, a fresh, deliberate act of exclusion. An usher with a practiced, impersonal smile led Zola and Kaelen not to the rows reserved for family, but to a section much further back, a sort of polished no-man's land populated by business associates and distant family friends. The placement was a clear, unspoken statement. "You are guests, but you are not us." Zola settled into the plush chair, a strange sense of calm descending upon her. From this distance, she was no longer a participant, but an anthropologist observing a foreign ritual. She watched the sea of elegantly dressed guests, their faces composed in masks of polite reverence, and saw not a celebration of love, but a grand theatrical merger of two powerful families. It was all so beautifully choreographed, so perfectly artificial. Kaelen sat beside her, rigid and silent, radiating a misery that was almost a physical force. Then the groom appeared at the altar. Marcus Thorne was exactly as handsome as one would expect, his tuxedo tailored to perfection, his hair impeccably styled. Yet beneath the polished exterior, something was amiss. A subtle tension coiled in his shoulders, and his eyes, instead of looking forward with joyous anticipation, kept flicking down to the expensive watch on his wrist. He looked less like a man about to marry the love of his life, and more like someone waiting for a crucial deadline to pass. The music swelled, the heavy doors at the back of the ballroom swung open, and Clarissa began her procession, a cloud of white lace and smug satisfaction. Marcus turned and a smile stretched across his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a well-rehearsed expression, a photograph of happiness rather than the real thing. As Clarissa glided down the aisle, his gaze, which should have been locked on her, began to drift. It was a subconscious act, a restless search across the faces of the assembled guests. Zola watched him, a flicker of detached curiosity stirring within her. It was odd, this groom who seemed to be looking for an escape route. His eyes swept over the rows, passing over faces with a blank, unfocused quality, until they reached her. And then they stopped. The connection was sudden and jarring. Marcus's eyes locked onto Zola's from across the crowded room. He squinted slightly, his brow furrowing in a mask of intense, disbelieving concentration. It was the look of a man trying to place a familiar face in a wildly unexpected context. Zola, knowing she had never seen him before in her life, assumed it was a simple case of mistaken identity. She offered a small, polite nod, a gesture intended to break the stare and release him from his confusion. but he didn't look away. His eyes remained fixed on her, the unfocused search now a laser-sharp, penetrating gaze. The polite nod went unreturned, and a prickle of unease traced its way down her spine. The ceremony continued around this strange, silent exchange. Clarissa reached the altar, her face beaming, oblivious. The officiant began to speak, his voice a soothing, sonorous drone filling the grand space. But Zola could hardly hear him. All she was aware of was the unnerving weight of the groom's unwavering stare. When the time came for the vows, the room fell into a reverent hush. Clarissa recited her promises in a clear, confident voice. Then it was Marcus's turn. He cleared his throat, his eyes finally breaking from Zola to look at his bride. "I, Marcus," he began, his voice hoarse. He swallowed and then looked back out at the crowd, his gaze finding Zola's again, as if drawn by an invisible string. I... He faltered, the words dying on his lips. He simply stopped, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes still locked on Zola. A wave of whispers rippled through the ballroom. Clarissa's perfect smile curdled into a tight, furious line. "Marcus!" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that the microphone nearly caught. "What is wrong with you? Wait." The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their polite masks slipping to reveal expressions of confusion and alarm. Everyone assumed it was a simple case of wedding day nerves, a groom overwhelmed by the moment, but Zola knew it was something else. She saw the change in his expression. Marcus took a single, deep, shuddering breath, as if coming up for air after a long dive. When his eyes focused on her again, the confused, questioning look was gone. It had been replaced by something far more potent, an expression of pure, earth-shattering recognition. And in that moment, Zola felt a cold dread seep into her bones. The carefully constructed piece of her life was about to be obliterated. The real storm had finally arrived. The silence in the grand ballroom was a physical entity, a thick, suffocating blanket that smothered all sound. For a heart-stopping moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then Marcus Thorne gently, deliberately, released Clarissa's hand from his arm. He turned to her, and though his back was to the crowd, the microphone on his lapel picked up his next words with perfect, devastating clarity. "I'm sorry, Clarissa," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I have to do this." He didn't wait for a reply. He stepped down from the pristine white altar, his movements measured and certain, and began to walk. A collective gasp rippled through the room. 100 heads turned in unison, a synchronized wave of shock and disbelief, following the groom as he walked not towards the exit, but down the central aisle, directly into the heart of his own wedding reception. He didn't hurry. Each step was solid, purposeful, echoing slightly on the marble floor. The sea of guests parted before him as if by an invisible force, their faces a gallery of confusion. Zola felt her heart begin to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The path Marcus was walking had only one possible destination. Her. Instinct took over. Kaelen shot to his feet, his body a rigid shield he placed between Zola and the approaching groom. "Marcus, what are you doing?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Marcus didn't seem to hear him. He didn't even seem to see him. His eyes were fixed solely on Zola, and they were filled with a wild, dawning light. He stopped just a few feet away, breathing heavily, not from the short walk, but from the force of the emotion that was coursing through him. "It's you," he breathed, the words barely a whisper. "It has to be you. The name, Vance. I never made the connection." From the altar, a shriek of pure fury cut through the charged air. "Marcus, what is this insane little drama you're playing at? Get back up here. That's just Kaelen's girlfriend." Clarissa's voice was a shrill, ugly thing, but Marcus didn't even flinch. He didn't turn his head. His entire universe had contracted to the small space he now shared with Zola. He looked directly into her eyes, and with a reverence that was profoundly, shockingly out of place, he inclined his head in a short, formal bow. The string quartet had long since fallen silent. The whispers had died. The only sound was the frantic beating of Zola's own heart. Into that dead, perfect silence, Marcus spoke, his voice ringing with a clarity that reached every corner of the opulent room. Ma'am. The word detonated. It was a sonic boom of respect, a title of such deference that it made no sense. A tidal wave of murmurs erupted through the crowd. Eleanor Sterling, who had been half risen from her seat, froze completely, her face a mask of utter bewilderment. Clarissa's mouth hung open, her beautiful bridal makeup suddenly looking like a grotesque parody. And Kaelen slowly lowered himself back into his seat, his gaze shifting from Marcus to Zola, his expression one of absolute shattering disbelief. It wasn't anger or betrayal in his eyes, it was awe. It was the look of a man realizing the person he loved was a universe he had never even known existed. Marcus straightened up, his voice now filled with a fervent, overwhelming gratitude that transformed the scene from a bizarre interruption into a public testimony. "You're V," he said, the name spoken with a kind of hushed reverence. "The head of Vance Capital." The name of the notoriously private, almost mythical venture capital fund dropped into the room, and the murmuring intensified, now laced with recognition and shock. You believed in my tech startup when no one else would. My company was about to go under. My career was over. I sent 100 desperate emails and only one person replied. V. He took a step closer, his voice thick with unshed tears. You saved me. You saved everything I've ever worked for. The only reason I have the money for a wedding like this, the only reason I can stand here today, is because of you. The secret was out, laid bare in the most spectacular and public fashion imaginable. Zola Vance was no longer the quiet, out-of-place girlfriend in the simple dress. In the space of 2 words and a 30-second explanation, she had been transformed. She was power. She was the hidden hand that shaped fortunes. She was, to the man who was supposed to be marrying into the Sterling dynasty, the ultimate authority. She was ma'am. The dead silence that followed Marcus's testimony lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then it shattered. A low wave of murmuring began at the back of the room and swept forward, growing in volume until the grand ballroom was buzzing like a disturbed hive. The name Vance Capital was whispered from guest to guest, a name synonymous with almost supernatural success and absolute anonymity. The faces of the Sterling family, caught in the harsh glare of 100 curious eyes, cycled through a rapid, brutal series of emotions. Shock gave way to disbelief, which curdled into a dawning, sickening horror, and finally settled into the pale, waxen mask of pure, unadulterated humiliation. All their carefully constructed social armor had been stripped away, leaving them naked and exposed in the ruins of their own perfect party. The sneering comments, the cold dismissal, the casual cruelty, it all came rushing back, now recast as a grotesque, self-inflicted farce. They hadn't just insulted Kaelen's girlfriend. They had publicly scorned one of the most powerful and invisible figures in their world. Eleonora was the first to recover, her social instincts kicking in like a defibrillator. Her face, which had been frozen in horror, suddenly melted into a performance of warm, maternal concern. She began moving towards Zola, her pace quick and purposeful, a frantic attempt at damage control. She glided past the stunned Marcus as if he were a piece of furniture, her eyes locked on Zola with a brilliant, false light. "Zola, my dear child," she cooed, her voice oozing a syrupy affection that was nauseatingly artificial. She reached out as if to touch Zola's arm. "Why on earth didn't you tell us? This is all just a terrible, terrible misunderstanding." Zola didn't flinch. She didn't move. She simply looked at the woman who had made her feel like an intruder just an hour before, her expression a blank wall of calm. There was no anger in her eyes, no triumph, only a profound and weary clarity. "There was no misunderstanding, Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an immense weight that cut through Eleanor's pretense. "The way you and your daughter treated me before you knew my name, that was not a misunderstanding. That was you. The only thing that has changed is that you now know you were rude to the wrong person." She turned her head slightly, her gaze finding Kaelen's. His eyes were wide, not with shock at her identity anymore, but with a deep, painful understanding. He was finally seeing it all, the reason for her quiet life, the weight of the world she carried, the reason she needed the sanctuary of a simple coffee shop. He finally understood. The rejection, so calm and so absolute, seemed to strike Eleonora dumb. But Clarissa, who had been standing at the altar like a porcelain doll dropped on a stone floor, finally broke. A ragged, animalistic sob tore from her throat, her face blotchy and red beneath its expensive veneer, twisted into a mask of pure hatred. She whirled on Marcus, her voice a raw shriek that echoed through the ballroom. "So what was this? What was this all for? You humiliate me. You destroy our wedding in front of everyone we know. For her?" Marcus looked at the woman he was supposed to marry, and for the first time a flicker of genuine emotion crossed his face. It was cold, hard pity. "Did I humiliate you, Clarissa?" he asked, his voice devoid of all its earlier warmth. "Or did your own behavior humiliate you? The way you treated the one person who gave me a future? Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think that kind of ugliness could stay hidden forever?" That was it. Zola felt a sudden, overwhelming need to be gone. This suffocating room, thick with the stench of hypocrisy and shattered pride, was no longer her concern. She had no interest in watching the rest of the collapse. She had played her part unwillingly, and now it was over. She looked at Kaelen, her eyes conveying everything she didn't need to say. "Let's go," she said, her voice just for him. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look at his mother's stricken face or his sister's hysterical sobs. He simply nodded, his choice made in an instant. He stood up, took her hand, and together they turned their backs on the spectacle. They walked away from the ruined wedding, the broken vows and the braying whispers of the crowd. They left behind a family imploding under the weight of its own prejudice, a bride weeping at a fallen altar, and an undeniable truth hanging in the air. A person's worth is not a label you can see, but a quality you either possess or you don't. As they stepped out of the gilded ballroom and into the cool, quiet night, it felt less like an escape and more like a return to the real world. The silence in the car as it sliced through the glittering, indifferent city was a strange and peaceful thing. It wasn't the heavy, awkward silence that follows a catastrophe, but the clean, quiet space that comes after a storm has passed, leaving the air washed and new. Zola watched the streetlight streak across the window, her reflection a fleeting ghost against the dark glass. She felt Kaelen's gaze on her, but she didn't turn, content to exist in this calm, transitional moment. The chaos of the hotel felt a million miles away. After several long minutes, it was Kaelen who finally spoke, his voice low and raspy with an emotion that went far beyond regret. "I'm sorry," he said, and the simple words were imbued with a profound weight. He paused, waiting until she turned to look at him. "And I don't mean I'm sorry that you didn't tell me. I have no right to that. I'm sorry because I failed you. I was so naive. I was so arrogant to think that I could somehow protect you from my family, when I didn't even understand the world you were trying to protect yourself from. I saw their prejudice as a character flaw, something shallow. I never saw it for what it was, a weapon, and I walked you right into their line of fire. That's what I'm sorry for." His apology was a key, unlocking a door inside Zola that she had kept bolted for years. A deep, shuddering breath escaped her, a sigh that carried the weight of a long, lonely battle. For the first time, she didn't just give him a piece of her story, she gave him all of it. "It was never about hiding, Kaelen," she began, her voice soft but steady. "It was about searching. After my parents died and I took over, the world changed. Or maybe it just showed its true face. People stopped seeing me. They saw a name on a building, a walking bank vault, an opportunity. Every relationship, every friendship was transactional. I got so tired of the calculations, of trying to figure out who wanted Zola and who wanted Vance Capital." She looked down at her hands, remembering the crushing betrayals that had driven her into retreat. "I just wanted to find something real, a place where I could just be. And then I found that little coffee shop, and I found you. With you, for the first time in years, I wasn't Vance Capital. I was just Zola, the woman who likes her coffee black and reads too many books. I didn't tell you because that's secret. It was the wall that kept my sanctuary safe. It was the only thing that proved that what we had was real. They didn't talk about the ruined wedding or the future of the Sterling family. They talked about their future, a conversation grounded not in fantasy but in a new, shared reality. They talked about boundaries, about how to navigate a world that would now view them through a completely different lens. It was Kaelen who brought it into focus. "I fell in love with Zola," he said with fierce certainty. "The brilliant, quiet, fiercely intelligent woman in the gray sweater. The fact that you're also a titan of industry who could buy and sell my entire family before breakfast doesn't change who I fell in love with. It just gives me one more reason to be in complete and utter awe of you. But my love is for you, not for the name." As if to prove it, he pulled the car over to the side of the quiet street. He took out his phone, his movements deliberate. Zola watched as he found his mother's number and pressed the call button. He put it on speaker, and the phone rang twice before Eleanor answered, her voice a frantic, hopeful question. "Kaelen?" "Mother," Kaelen said, his own voice calm, clear, and unyielding. There was no anger in it, only the cold, hard finality of a decision that had already been made. "I'm going to say this once. If you and Clarissa cannot find it within yourselves to offer Zola a sincere, genuine, and public apology for your behavior, then you need to understand that you will no longer be a part of my life. There will be no negotiation on this. This is the choice." He didn't wait for the sputtering, panicked reply. He simply ended the call, plunging the car back into silence. He had made his stand. He had chosen his world. He put the car back in gear, but he didn't drive towards his apartment or hers. He drove back to the place where their two worlds had first truly met. When he parked, the familiar gentle glow of the coffee shop sign illuminated Zola's face. They walked inside, the little bell above the door chiming softly, a sound that felt like a welcome home. The air smelled of roasted beans and old paper, the scent of their beginning. They sat at their usual table in their worn armchairs. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. The shadows were gone. There were no more secrets hiding in the space between them. The foundation of their love wasn't built on the Sterling name or the Vance fortune. It was built here, in the quiet authenticity of this room, stronger and more real than any empire. They were not a billionaire and her mysterious boyfriend. They were just Zola and Kaelen, equals, finally ready to face the world together on their own terms.